You want to be rich, but how and for what purpose? That's the conversation I should have with my children, I was told by Vijay Prashad, a world-renowned leftist scholar, writer, and historian. We were talking about the rising global south on the sidelines of a forum dedicated to the subject held in Shanghai. Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you this time from the beautiful city of Shanghai. During the wide-ranging conversation, we touched upon what Vijay Prashad calls a new mood in developing countries, reactions from the US-led West, China-India relations, the Eurasian continent, young people in Latin America, and so on and so forth. And we started with his jacket. So Vijay, it's such a nice pleasure to have you again and to catch up with, what has happened in the... But this jacket that you're wearing, I have to start with this. Tell me the story about it.
Well, I was very fortunate that Professor Liu Xin said, you must come to
from Shanghai Normal University.
Yeah, from East China Normal.
China Normal.
She has been doing a study in this area in southeastern China, where there's been a major push for rural revitalization through the sport of football. Mm-hmm. They have a football field, people come, the matches are free, there's a halftime celebration of clothes and so on. This summer, there was a catastrophic flood. About 3 or 4 meters of water, muddy water, river water, covered the pitch, just wrecked the town.
Right.
It's very interesting. I watched video images of it. People's Liberation Army came into the town when the water started to recede. They cleaned the town. Yeah. Within 28 days, the pitch was ready, infrastructure rebuilt, the shops were open. And it was really interesting. I visited a shop which had been underwater. The woman who owns the shop, Lan, was absolutely ecstatic to say, this is my stuff, etc. There was none of the despair over what had happened to her shop just a few months ago. And that actually struck me. And at that moment, I said, let me find something that I want to buy. Because, not because, I want to buy a jet. I felt I want a piece of her enthusiasm because she wasn't looking at the near past when everything seemed destroyed. If my house goes underwater, I'm going to want to cry for like 2 weeks. Yeah. I don't think I can start cleaning it up immediately and rebuilding. I just feel like everything's finished. Give me some time. No, this young entrepreneur got into the shop, cleaned it up, painted it anew, changed the carpeting, and she, when I saw this on the shelf, I was like, this is mine. Why? Because as a phoenix rising from the ashes, like her town. It's a phoenix, yeah. It's like the global south, yeah.
Yeah. It's like the global south.
It's like China. You've got the century of humiliation. You've got your land taken away from you. Hong Kong taken by the British. You've got Japanese you got all of that. But you're rising from the ashes, and I just felt that this phoenix coming out of the ashes, that's our story. We were down in the dirt.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, colonialism and all of that, just rising up and saying, we're back. And I felt if Lan could rise up, and then if they could make something like this, I better wear it.
It's great. It looks great on you, I must say.
Oh, well, that coming from you, that means a lot to me. Thanks.
No, it really caught my eye, and I'm so happy that you found the inspiration, or the kind of encouragement from the story of this jacket and of that woman. Let's come back to what you have been so passionate about, the global south. Last time we sat down, we talked about the new mood. Remind the people again, the new mood in the global south, and why you choose to use the word new mood, and how has that mood evolved or changed or progressed over the last year?
Well, it's really interesting because we have two sides of this new mood. It's a mood because you don't want to characterize this as a big development. You know, there's something happening in global South countries. It's tangible. We can feel it. I can give you evidence for it. But also, I don't want to exaggerate what's happening because of this other thing that happened recently. So what's the new mood? The best example of the new mood was at the General Assembly of the United Nations. Gustavo Petro of Colombia, the president, comes there, gives a searing speech. Part of the speech, he says to the leaders of the collective West or the global North, he says, you are complicit in the genocide. And he names names, and he's very blunt. You know, he says, this is what you've done. Mr. Trump took it personally, said, we're not going to renew his visa. Okay? He's the president of Colombia. And Petro went outside the UN building in New York, stood with Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, and he said, I don't care. I've got Bogota. You know, I don't need to come, I don't need to beg for a visa. He goes home. That's a sign of the new mood. He's saying, I don't really care. That's really interesting. But we also see the countries of the North, Mr. Trump, for instance, understanding that this new mood has taken hold. And they want to punish countries in the way they know for exercising the new mood. The best example is Malaysia. Malaysia under Anwar Ibrahim has been, you know, making some interesting moves, trying to establish a little independence for Malaysia. On the one side, there's always the question of Palestine, population almost 100% with the Palestinians and so on. But also there's the question of development, development aid, you know, what should Malaysia be exporting? And Anwar Ibrahim was being quite creative. Mr. Trump arrives there, he goes for the ASEAN summit, but really, he goes to see Mr. Anwar Ibrahim. It's a, you know, private bilateral meeting, and he punishes him because he extracts things from Anwar Ibrahim which were completely unexpected. Nobody expected the quote-unquote deal that Trump got. He then goes to South Korea. Now, South Korea, a country where the people just prevented martial law under the previous president. Yeah, they went out on the streets and the president is in jail. You have a sort of centrist president now, okay? He's also making moves, not independence, it's hard for South Korea, it's basically got so many US bases. Trump goes there, extorts 85% of South Korea's external reserves back to the United States, punishes these countries. So there's a new mood, we can feel it, it's there. In Malaysia, it's the people and it's the government. In South Korea, it's the people. But the collective West is striking back. It doesn't want to see this new mood spread. It's trying to, you know, sort of damp it out, put the lights out. And that's what I mean by the other side. You got the new mood, but then you got Trump.
So what do you predict that's going to happen? How will the new mood evolve in the next, say, 5 years' time? Will it become something even more concrete, more powerful? Will the push and pull between the North and the South become ever more tense, that there will be a point where something is going to happen, that a new balance will have to be found?
Yes, I mean, the term we've borrowed from Simon Bolivar 200 years ago is a new equilibrium. We need an equilibrium. Yeah. Things are out of control. Right. Yeah, I mean, this whole new Cold War, the push by Mr. Trump against China in particular. Okay, there's a sort of, I don't want to use the word ceasefire, but there's a kind of truce or an armistice that took place in Korea, but it's temporary. It's not an equilibrium. We need an equilibrium. And in the period ahead, I think to predict something is a little difficult, but I would say with almost certainty that these regional and multilateral blocs like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS and so on are going to strengthen their alternative mechanisms. Countries are going to try their best to organize their trade and development so that it's not entirely oriented to the West. There's a good reason for that. Now that Europe is going to spend 5% of its GDP on arms, its capacity to buy goods and services from the global South going to deteriorate. Yeah. Europe is going to face higher energy prices. So the consumption ability of Europe is going to deteriorate. That means that countries in Africa, countries in Asia, Latin America are going to have to start trading more with each other, and particularly regionally. Like, you know, I think, frankly, in the next 5 to 10 years, India and China are going to reach the position that China and Russia reached. You know better than I that it was only in a blink of an eye a few years ago that China and Russia sorted out the border dispute.
So long as you have the political will.
Absolutely. And I think it's political will sometimes driven by the economics of it, that India and China need to settle whatever remains of the differences, you know, because it is actually somewhat, I don't know, irrational is the soft word to use. It's irrational for India, Pakistan and China to have problems because, and you know, India has problems in fact with most of its neighbors because this, you know, actually prevents robust Asian trade. If India and China
Which is in India's interest.
It's in everybody's interest because India actually produces things that could enter the Chinese market. China produces a lot that could enter the Indian market. And even if there's a little imbalance in the beginning, this is going to even out because these are both very talented countries.
Some people say you are a little bit too idealistic, maybe too optimistic. I mean, decades-old grievances won't be wiped out like that. How do you look at the challenges that this kind of ideal situation could encounter in reality? Do you think it can really happen?
Well, the Indian government right now is, in a way, emotionally, ideologically pro-Western. That's its ideological stand, as it were. But practically, the Indian government cannot break with Russia because it requires cheap energy or decently priced.
It also has a very long relationship with Russia.
Very long and very deep relationship. It's almost impossible for India to sever those ties. And if the US keeps pushing India to do so, it's going to be a little difficult. As well, you know, because of the Abraham Accords, the United States has allowed India space to have better relations with Israel. Because the Arab countries that used to be the brake on India's good relations with Israel are now moving to normalize with Israel themselves. So this is posing a challenge. But because of the genocide, it's very hard for India to actually increase ties with Israel now. So for many reasons, this government is not able to accelerate in its pro-Western, pro-Israeli, etc. direction. That's going to provide some problems. The fact that Modi came to Tianjin is a very good indicator of the practical thinking inside the Prime Minister's office. They were thinking pragmatically. And let me just say one thing, which is that when I was last in China, I gave an interview to Guancha saying Modi should come to the SCO meeting in China. That was reported in the South China Morning Post. The Indian newspapers picked it up. Indian TV started saying, well, why doesn't Modi go to Tianjin? And then he said he's going to Tianjin. So
good.
I don't know, you know.
You played a part in it.
Maybe
strategic messaging.
Exactly. So now I'm going to give you another message.
What is it?
I think when Mr. Putin goes to India, he's going to be in India very soon. When he goes to India, Mr. Putin should actually propose in India a trilateral summit with President Xi Jinping, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Mr. Putin himself, probably somewhere in the Russian East. Not in Moscow, not somewhere over there, but in the Russian East, where they sit down and where they just talk about the future of Asia. What is the plan for Asia for the next 50 years?
Why do you want to send this message?
Well, I think that right now, the role of Mr. Putin could be quite significant. You know, when at Tianjin, Mr. Putin and Narendra Modi actually spent a lot of time together. They traveled together. Exactly. They traveled together. They spoke a lot together. They seemed pretty friendly. I think this is an important message that Modi was also sending to Washington, that, you know, they allowed pictures of this to travel all over. So that relationship seems to be pretty intact. Definitely after the parade in Beijing, the relationship between Mr. Putin and Xi Jinping is very strong. And I believe, you know, in matters of high diplomacy, relationships count a great deal. And if Mr. Putin can bring them to the table, I think they need to establish some ground rules for the way forward. China is at the threshold of a new 5-year plan. Okay, where does India come into that 5-year plan? What's the role of ASEAN in that 5-year plan? You know, I'm sure these are questions in Beijing that they are thinking about, and I would like India to have a bigger role in the kind of Asia that I think Russia and China are already envisioning. And eventually, I would like Indonesia to be in the conversation, Pakistan, Bangladesh, you know, all of us who are not directly linked to a US-based security pact like Japan, South Korea and so on should be in a conversation. Because we need to tempt them to come into our conversation. This is different from RCEP, which is a trade agreement.
Right.
And it's different from the SCO, which is actually maturing in a very slow and good fashion out of security into a broader political arrangement. This is a conversation which is almost philosophical. You know, what is the future of Asia?
It's very important for, you know, these major countries in Asia or Eurasia to come together. On the other hand, let's look at the other end of the world and at a different level, young people. And let's look at the other parts that we don't talk about not so much. Latin America, you know, Africa, and talk about, you have children, I have children, they're all in their, you know, late teens, early 20s. They seem to be in a different world. Does the new mood affect them? Do they also have a new mood? Do they feel the new mood?
I feel like young people today in many countries, you know, whether it's in Nepal or Bangladesh or in India or in Malawi or Senegal, you know, these countries, I see in these countries people struggling to find a way to imagine what tomorrow looks like. And one interesting thing about this country, we're sitting in China, we're sitting in Shanghai, I feel like in this country, young people do feel a sense of tomorrow, possibility. The challenge for, I think, the political leadership here is to create new ideals for them. You know, how do you do that? Do you send them off to the countryside through some program so they get to see what rural revitalization looks like, especially, you know, young people born and raised in cities. Increasingly, urbanization cuts them off from, you know, what has been there.
What is next door?
What is next door? And also, you know, it's important for young people to realize where they've come from. I was talking to somebody recently who said to me, so what's the most interesting thing about China? And I said, well, it's the fact that people, even in the most remote areas, have a sense of pride. And that is a legacy, a heritage of the Chinese Revolution. Because before the Chinese Revolution, you had wretched social inequalities in the countryside. People in the countryside walked with their eyes to the floor. Now they look up. That's enormous. Didn't happen all over the world. So that's about the future, you know. But even in China, you can allow that history to atrophy. People don't inherit it. You know, they are born in 1990, they're born in 2000. They don't have a sense of how enormously different their past was or is, because it's vital to the past of, say, somebody else. And I think young people in Nepal, when they went to protest, they were saying things like, we don't want to migrate anymore. We want a future in our country. We don't want to go and wash dishes in some other European state.
Or drive taxis.
We want to build a future in our country. I think that's really a big challenge all of our countries will face.
Do you mean it's the domestic governance, is the ability for the governments in Global South countries to deliver for the young people? Is that the problem?
I mean, imagine the government in Beijing has released a number of initiatives, global initiatives, global governance initiatives. So imagine an initiative called the Global Tomorrow Initiative or the Global Dream Initiative, you know, which says that how are we as people who are older, how are we going to provide in the Global South in particular
for the younger
tomorrow? Why? Because the Global South, the median age is low. In the Global North, the median age is high.
Right.
People are not having children. That's why migrants are doing the work to take care of the elderly. Well, but people in the global south don't want to go and do that work. They don't want to get a degree in Bangladesh and then go and become a carer in Stockholm for somebody else's grandmother. And they never get to see their grandmother, maybe once in 10 years or something. That's not a life people want. They don't want that life. So we have two compelling problems. In the global north, they are increasingly anti-immigrant, but they're going to rely on immigrants, not having children, and they're aging. In the global south, you have young populations whose aspirations for something different very high. And we have to think about this. It's a philosophical question, it's an economic question, but above all, it's a question of culture. What is the culture being in a way given as the endowment of young people? It's not about economic opportunities alone. It's about, as you said, it's about their ideals. It's about their dreams. It's about the cultural coordinates that they have for themselves. If a kid says, I want to get rich and want to get rich fast, or I want to be famous, that's a very limited set of cultural coordinates. I don't think that
I have to think about this because my son just told me his goal is to get rich.
Yeah, but what I would say to him is okay, that's fine, but what do you mean by that? Let's deepen the culture of your aspiration. To get rich for what? To get rich how? What mark do you want to leave on the world? It's not just how you want to consume in the world, because to get rich a little bit is about consumption. Because we're all going to die, it's inevitable. What mark do you want to leave? How do you want your children to remember you?
Yeah. Are you saying that the sense of lack of purpose, meaning, or value for this world is the reason why there's so much discontent among the young people in developing countries?
I think the moment you start increasing people's livelihood choices, the moment they are not living in abject poverty, aspirations rise.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in a society, not so much in China, but outside China, in a society which is largely capitalist in its orientation, aspirations become effectively about money, they become about fame and so on. If that is the sole coordinates of aspiration, then your purpose is to become famous, make money. In an empty way. I just want to make money. How? I don't really care. I don't care how I'm famous. I just want to be famous.
I need to be very careful with that.
Yes, because what you need, as you said, the correct word. What is your purpose in life, And here, think about this. We came from long histories of traditional thinking, which gave people a sense of purpose. That has been largely shredded. We've moved away from that.
For developing countries?
For developing countries are moving rapidly away from some of these older ideas. And people in some countries, Latin America, moving to new forms of religion, Pentecostalism, evangelism, which give people purpose. But sometimes the purpose is, they kind of give you a fake purpose, because the purpose is get rich. If you get rich, God is happy with you. It's called the prosperity gospel. So it's not actually a cultural purpose. I always say to people, how do you want other people to see you? In Hindi, we have a word called pehchan, which is a much richer word than reputation. Pehchan means, how do you recognize me? How do you see me? Do you see me as a person who's pushing people out of the way to get rich and get famous? Or do you see me as somebody bringing people together to solve problems in a common way? What is given more respect in a society? Shouldn't we respect the person who solves common problems? Pehchan.
Pehchan. Wow. I would definitely think about this word, definitely. Is that the challenge, though, that is facing us in the developing countries, in the global south, as we are establishing this new equilibrium? That's
our internal enormous challenge. I mean, it's also a challenge in China, because that is one of the reasons for the revitalization of what is called red culture. That is the reason why now when I go to museums, they're really great. I mean, the anti-fascist museums that have been built are really a very keen education in a history that people mustn't forget. I think the emergence of a kind of red culture in China is to answer that gap.
Or to keep that up, the maintenance.
Exactly,
Yeah.
you to refuel the culture in a way, you know, to refuel the culture. It's very important. Even the Chinese leadership, I think, understands it very clearly. You don't want to have a society of purposeless people, because, you know, what it has led to in Western societies, it leads to drugs, it leads to despair. You know, almost 1 million people, I don't want to, you know, say this in a negative way. I don't want to make people feel bad, but almost 1 million people in the world die of loneliness every year.
Terrible.
We don't want that.
Terrible. So if a young person in Ecuador, a young person in Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia, or Nepal or India watching you at this moment, what do you want to say to them? I know it's a cliche to, you know, try to give a sentence of advice to the young people, but if you can tell them one thing that they can remember, Pechan, besides the Pechan word, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that you live in a place where there are problems all around you. Gather your friends and go solve the problems. You know, simple things like set up a morning of collecting the trash on your own street. You know, get people in the neighborhood involved in that.
But some people are saying already young people are living in a sense of guilt because of the climate change thing. You know, they already have a lot of psychological burden. They probably say, I'm not feeling fine, not feeling well. And you're asking me to go out and do more to help other people.
But it's not really help other people alone. It's to build a sense of community. It's also to help yourself. You know, one of the antidotes to despair is to collect people together and do things. There's a lot of people who've researched the kind of well-being function of doing things. You're not helping people. Remember, this example isn't, you're not going and asking people to go and help somebody. You know, you're saying, let's clean up our neighborhood. You know, my neighborhood is dirty. I'm going to clean it up. We're not waiting for anybody. We want anyway more collective action, more public action, you know, in all societies. You know, you think about how places like Kerala, you know, very much a socialist culture, very akin to China. During the pandemic, places like Kerala, most, you know, parts of China that we had studied, people took public action. They went door to door to check on neighbors, local committees, you know, streets of, you know, groups of people from the local street structures or whatever, you know, political, administrative structures. People helped other people out. And they didn't always do it through the state or through the municipality. They often did it in buildings and so on. People knocked on doors. In the city of Trivandrum in Kerala, a young woman was part of a student and youth organization. They took a clipboard, put on their mask, went door to door asking people, what do you need? You need medicines once a week? Okay, we're going to get it to you. You know, we collect the money, we get you the medicines and so on. This woman was then at 21 elected the mayor of the capital city of Kerala. Because everybody saw her and this group of students and youth doing these things, helping other people out. There was no guilt in this. They just did it. They went out there and tried to make the world a better place. And that didn't get them necessarily fame. Everybody didn't become mayor. That didn't make anybody money. They did it as out of their hearts. You know, you are part of a community. You're not alone. We got to break the cycle of individualism and loneliness.
Vijay Prashad. We'll leave it there.
Absolutely.
Executive Director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And that's it for this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from the eastern Chinese city of Shanghai. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.